Welcome to Module 3, the final module of the 2021 Southeast Division StartWell event. The talks in this module are based broadly on the StartWell principles of continuous learning and personal resilience. The first speakers in this module are Dr. Alison Conway and Dr. Simon Michelson. They will be talking to us about how to approach and, more importantly, ace the consultant interview. They have very kindly done these talks for us before, and they were very widely attended and appreciated. Their session today is titled The Consultant Interview, Preparing and Performing Well. Over to Doctors Conway and Michelson.
Welcome. We're going to be talking about the consultant interview. Alison and myself have been running courses on this topic for a few years on the North West London Higher Training Scheme. We run two courses, one on preparation and the other one on mock consultant interviews with experienced consultants and giving feedback. Next slide, please. So we're looking at 3 time periods. The crucial period when you're preparing for the interview and trying to get there with as much knowledge and confidence as possible. The interview itself, how to think about how you come across and approaching the questions. And then afterwards, whether you succeed or don't succeed, and also a bit on interview anxiety. Next slide, please. So have a think for what's worked for you previously. You'll have all done some interviews, and just think about some ones that, particularly those that went well. What did you do when you were preparing for it? And also what you would have liked to have done in retrospect that might have helped you more. So if you just like to pause the slide just for a few moments, just to think about that before we go on to the next section. Next slide, please. So over the years, I've sort of got a few tips that I think have generally helped and I think might be useful to most people. So the first one is playing 20 questions. So that is get a notebook. Obviously, you can do it on a computer, but I like that of getting a notebook and on each page, just have on the top of it the questions. So, for example, why you? Why us? Team working, what do you think about teaching, and what would you do if you had a problem with a colleague? So think about this sort of the standard sort of 15-20 questions that you're likely to come up, and just put them on the top of each page, and then carry that book around with you and just jot down ideas and thoughts, speak to other people, brainstorm, but very importantly, don't try and finalize the answers too quickly. If you think about it like writing a play, people don't start by writing the dialogue. They look at the plot, they think about the characters. So just jot down lots and lots of ideas, and then gradually, a bit like those pictures that some of you are old enough to remember, where you look at a lot of dots and then suddenly a picture of a boat emerges or a face. Hopefully 2 or 3 themes will emerge that you can then hang all the information and ideas around. And I think this serves a number of points. One is it allows you to develop your ideas slowly, but also it prevents you in the interview freezing, because if you have those 3 themes locked in your mind, you're not going to forget, and also stops you rambling because you're not just going from one random idea to another. The other thing that I've used over the years, some of you may be familiar with, is mind maps. Next slide, please. So this is just something that I took off the net. It's not mine, but if you look at it, so this is preparing for a job interview. What it has is 4 or 5 main themes, and off each of those, a bit like a tree, are smaller branches. And as you develop this mind map, it never looks as nice as that. Sometimes you begin to get fresh ideas, you start to see how ideas link with each other, and perhaps some ideas work from one question to another. So all it is, I've certainly found it very useful, and I'd recommend mind maps if you haven't used them before. Next slide, please. So first thing is, and I'm sure you're all aware, really just ask them. There are lots of consultants around you who've been on panels, who've been on the other side, and they'll be able to give some good advice on what the types of questions are, what's perhaps currently being asked about in your trust, and also sort of their suggestions on what might be good in answers. I mean, today we're not going to be giving all the answers. We're looking at how you approach the questions and get the information. Most importantly, I think you should become psychotic, as I say, which is you don't want to hear an answer aloud the first time in an interview and realise that really doesn't sound very good. So talk to the bathroom mirror, talk to your friends or other halves. Just as you speak them aloud, you get to hear quite quickly what works, what doesn't work, what sounds good. And again, it adds new ideas. Don't forget the mock interviews. I know a lot of us nobody likes one, but it really makes a difference for getting feedback, both on how you answer the questions, but also on your non-verbal, how you come across non-verbally. And even if in this day of virtual interviews, which Alison will mention, I think it's even more important to sort of try and have a mock interview with a number of people. And then don't get to a perfect answer. We don't want a perfect answer, but just keep refining your answers so you're familiar enough to be able to talk around it. Okay, next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to Alison.
Right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about preparing for the interview, first of all. And the first thing to think about is making an application. And I would strongly advise you, if you haven't done so already, to register with NHS Jobs and start looking at what's available. And you can look at the adverts, which will show you the job descriptions. So all job descriptions should have been approved by a regional advisor from the college. And that gives you some guarantee of quality assurance. But you can also look at the application forms, and these are fairly standard. So what I would suggest is that as you are nearing maybe ST6, ST7 year, you start looking at application forms and think about how you would fill in them and maybe draft some answers to some of the sections, because that also gives you a chance to see what's missing and perhaps to do that quality improvement project that you've been meaning to do for a long time, or write up the research that you've had hanging around. Then I come on to research, and what I mean by that is researching the job. So if you see a job and you're interested in applying, find out a bit about it first, because at the moment, with the way the job market is, most jobs will have 1 or 2 applicants. So if you apply and you're shortlisted, there's quite a strong chance you'll get the job. And you want to make sure that this is actually the job that you want to do for the next few years, rather than just the first job that's come up. Assuming then that you're shortlisted, before the interview, you should get notification of who will be on the panel. And I think it is really important to make an effort to try and contact as many people on the panel as you can. Ideally, it's good to go and visit in person and go and see the team that you'll be working with. But at the moment, you may have to make do with a phone call. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand back to Simon, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the actual interview.
Next slide, please. So it's a bit of a naff slide. I got it off the net, but I think it highlights a lot of important non-verbal behaviour. So this isn't necessarily medicine, but it's taken from a lot of interviews and people's feedback on what seems to be important. And if we look just at a few things, it's about really the impact. So if we start off with literally when you walk in the room. I remember going on a preparation for consultant interview course before I became a consultant, and we had an actor practicing with us how to come in the room. And we were really very skeptical, but actually it made a big difference. Some of you will know from psychology, the things that people remember most are primacy and recency, the first thing and the last thing that they see and hear. So being confident when you walk into the room. Secondly, that big smile that he's got. It's very important that you try and smile wherever possible, not look manic, but don't look too dour. Remember, they are also wanting a colleague to work with. And if you can, have what's called the Duchenne smile. Some of you may know this. This is a proper smile where you're smiling with the eyes, or smizing as they say, rather than one of those nervous smiles where it's not a proper smile. And that leads on to eye contact. I'm sure a lot of you know that when somebody asks you a question, you answer to all the people on the panel, which is important because otherwise the other panelists may lose concentration. But it also it's how you should do it. Finally, fidgeting. Now, as you can see, I sometimes use my hands. It was only when Alison pointed out to me that I fidgeted a great deal that I started to sort of hold my hands together. So that's where mock interviews again come into it, because you won't really know what you're doing that works well, and those things that really might irritate. For example, remember one chap used to say okay a lot, and it began to become very irritating. So it's really important to do those mock interviews, get feedback on how you come across. Next slide, please. So as before, I'd like you to just have a think about when you're in an interview, or imagine you're a panelist, what do you think makes a really good answer that makes you stand out from the crowd? So maybe have a pause for just a few seconds and have a think about, you know, what a really good answer sounds like. Okay, next slide, please. So a bit like the cask, really listen to what that question is about. No point giving a great answer to a question that they're not really answering, that they're not asking. So start off just listening very carefully. Next slide, please. So let's look at how to approach answering these questions. By now, you should have hopefully distilled down answers to most of your questions to 3 or 4 main points. So, for example, if it was about team working, the 3 points might be around communication, about team morale and conflict, and about team training. And at the beginning of your answer, it's nice to let the panel know what you're going to be talking about. So a different question might be, what's your thoughts on teaching? And you might start off by saying, I'd like to talk about this in 3 different ways: teaching undergraduates, postgraduate junior doctors, and also, most importantly, interprofessional multidisciplinary teaching. Next slide, please. So again, how do you structure the answer itself to make it interesting, make you stand out from all the other candidates who'll be probably answering the same things? So you start off talking generally about the topic and mentioning your 3 areas. But what you want to dig down to quite quickly is also what the challenges are. So, for example, again, in team working, the challenges might be at the moment vacancies and high numbers of locums. Perhaps give an example of a challenge that you faced in that area or helped with. And then, really importantly, they want to see what your opinion is of things. So it might be in that example, say, well, I think that the most important issues in team working are about working very closely with the team manager to pick up any problems early. And also, I like to have really open communication, you know, to use that cliche, I like my door to be open to anybody at any level. So having those personal issues just hopefully sets you apart from some of the other candidates who are giving maybe quite dry and general answers. Okay, next slide, please. And so just to illustrate really about how you try and put that personal quality across, because if you think about it, really what you're doing is selling yourself. You know, the questions they're going to be saying is, why should we choose you and why do you want us? So you want to try and relate the answer as much as possible to yourself, your experience, what you can give, but also what you know and what you've picked up from your preliminary due diligence to the organisation, and particularly if you've found out a lot about what that particular team is and what the issues are, you can bring that in. And obviously that's one of the reasons why internal candidates sometimes do have an advantage, because they can talk about what the local issues are, but hopefully you'll have picked up some of that yourself. Next slide, please. So just some top tips, really. The first one's fairly obvious. Try and not make it dry and boring by giving of yourself a bit more. Show what your ideas are, what your opinions are, what you've done, what you might like to do. The answer length, generally about 2 or 3 minutes. In general, try and talk about I rather than we. So I did this. And just to highlight again, before the interview, try and dredge up as many personal examples that you remember, or it may be about something that you witnessed, but personal examples that you can talk about, not too detailed, and as I've mentioned, as much local knowledge as possible. So next slide, please. So I'm going to be moving over to Alison next, and really think about what the panel, but put yourself in the panel's position, because they're really interested in 3 areas. What have you done that you can bring to us? What will you do if we do appoint you? And also, who are you? Remember, they're going to be wanting a colleague that they can work with. So a bit of you needs to shine through, and that will come through in how you come across and also the answers that you give. Next slide, please.
Right, thank you, Simon. So one of the roles I carry out is as a college assessor, and I've sat on a number of panels, mainly in London, but in other parts of the country also since lockdown. So I'm going to talk a bit about what happens in the panel and the sort of questions that I've seen being asked. This list is by no means exhaustive, but it maybe gives you some ideas to go away and work on. So first of all, thinking about who is likely to be on the panel on the day. So there should be a college assessor who's an independent person who isn't related in any way to the trust that you're applying to. And they would usually ask you fairly general questions about your CV, your skills, training you've done. And they're really there to make sure that you're suitably qualified to carry out the job. Then all panels should have the chief executive and the medical director or nominated deputies. And they would generally be asking questions about quality, governance, the CQC, and also they want to know what added value you might bring to their trust. Then you should also have a local consultant, ideally from the same specialty you're applying for. And really they are going to be interested in whether you're a colleague that they can work with. Can you work with the team locally? Are you going to be able to cope if there are particular pressures or service changes going on? And then the panel would be chaired by a lay member who is often either the chair of the trust or one of the non-executive directors. And they will probably be asking you why you're interested in applying to this particular trust, this particular job. And they might also be trying to probe some of your personal qualities. Then different trusts might also have a service user, although it's not inevitable. Some would also have a university representative who might particularly pick up on your research and teaching experience. I know one particular trust that always has a diversity champion. So the composition does vary somewhat, and you should find out about that in advance, as we've already said. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through categories of questions that I've seen being asked and then give some examples in each category. And as I say, this is not exhaustive, but it gives you a starting point and something to perhaps work on. So they want to know about you. They're going to ask something about management, your experience, leadership. They might well ask something clinical, although this isn't always the case. They might ask about training and teaching and research, and also working with service users and carers. Next slide, please. So questions about you, fairly general questions, which would often be the starting point of an interview. What skills and experience are you going to bring to this post? Why are you applying? They might ask you about your development needs over the first 2 years. So this gives an idea of whether you understand about the transition from a trainee to a consultant and what support you would need to get settled in and really start working effectively. And questions about feedback that you've had, either from your colleagues or from patients. Next slide, please. Then there might be more detailed questions about particular personal qualities and skills. So to do with communication, reflection, dealing with conflict, working in teams, working under pressure. These are all quite common areas that are covered. Next slide, please. So one example of question under communication is what makes you a good communicator? That's something that you could give examples about. Next slide, please. Learning from mistakes. So quite a popular question is around talking about something that hasn't gone to plan or something that has gone wrong and what you learned from it and what you would do differently in the future. Or more generally about a situation which you reflected and learned from. And I think these are really important ones to think about in advance and think about relevant recent examples. So there's no point in talking about something that happened when you were a core trainee and you made a medication error. That may be moderately revealing, but it's not really going to tell them how you're going to function as a consultant. Next slide, please. So dealing with conflict, obviously important, and they might ask you, for example, discuss how you resolved a recent disagreement or conflict in a team you were working in. So there's no point really in going in and saying you've never had a conflict with anyone, because nobody is really going to be convinced about that. So again, try and think of an example that puts you in a good light and demonstrates how you would manage these situations. And if you haven't directly experienced that, then try and think more creatively about situations you might have witnessed and been part of. Next slide, please. So team working. How would you inspire your team and maintain morale through periods of uncertainty and rapid change? So pretty relevant at all times, but perhaps particularly at the moment. Or how would you manage a team that's underperforming? And I think it's important in these sort of questions to be thinking about who's in the team, which members of staff do you have direct responsibility for managing, and who else do you need to liaise with, and working usually very closely with a team manager. Next slide, please. Working under pressure. So you may get a general question on how you deal with stress. How do you maintain a work-life balance? And I've been to quite a lot of panels during the last few months, and quite often they've asked something around the pandemic, what you've learned about yourself, how your practice has changed. So, be prepared for those sort of questions which may be related to particular current events. Next slide, please. So then the next category is questions around management, and I've divided those up into leadership, quality and quality improvement, and knowledge. Next slide, please. So leadership, you might be asked about your leadership style, and you need to have thought about that in advance. And I think strike a balance between spouting things from textbooks that may just be jargon, and having some examples and some concrete sort of evidence for what you really do when you're leading a team. So again, examples of showing clinical leadership in a team, and maybe more widely your role as a consultant within the trust, because they really want to know what added value you would bring to their organisation. Next slide, please. So quality and quality improvement. How do you know you're running a high quality service? Quite a challenging question. So I think one that it's good to think about in advance. And very often you might be asked about a quality improvement project you've been involved in, and make sure it is something that is fairly recent and where you've actually had a role, because you might be asked more detailed questions about that. Next slide, please. You might be asked some questions about your basic knowledge around the NHS, about any current issues. As I say, COVID has been a particular focus of questions recently. So you may get questions about specific information that you might be expected to know in that particular job or commissioning priorities. But I would say don't spend all your time preparing for the interview reading endless documents and white papers, because these questions tend to be only a very small part of really what they're looking for. Next slide, please. So if they do ask you clinical questions, they may present you with a complex clinical scenario and ask you how you would manage that. And of course, these are likely to be specific to the post. So for example, if it's a liaison post, I've seen an example of a young person with haemophilia who was refusing treatment and had psychotic symptoms. Next slide, please. Teaching and training, what makes a good teacher? Or questions around how you inspire either trainees or medical students to take up a career in psychiatry and remain within the profession. Next slide, please. In terms of research, you might be asked about your research experience, which some people have a lot of, and for some posts it's much more relevant than others. But you might be asked a broader question about promoting research in the service you work in and encouraging team members, say, for example, to be aware of clinical trials that are going on and recruit patients to them. Next slide, please. So the last category that I've identified is around service users and carers. And if you do have a service user on the panel, they can sometimes ask quite challenging questions. For example, how would you convince someone who didn't want to take medication to take it? Or give an example where it was important to involve a carer, but you actually found it quite challenging. Or there might be a broader question around involving service users and carers in service improvement or quality improvement projects. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the nature of interviews, because they do vary quite a lot from trust to trust. So as well as your standard interview with the people we talked about being present in a room asking you questions or on a remote platform, you may be asked to do a presentation. Could be 5 or 10 minutes with or without slides, often without questions at the end, which can be a bit disconcerting. And do prepare obviously in advance and practice presenting and make sure that you can stick to time. There may be some kind of panel, either a stakeholder panel with people from the service you might be working with or service users. And that would be a preliminary small interview where they might ask you questions. And then usually the results of that feeds into the main panel. There may be some psychometric testing. Some trusts are quite keen on that. Or different scenarios. For example, you need to run a team meeting or interview a patient or carer. So different trusts do have different formats, and I think it's always worth asking somebody who's had a recent interview at that trust what to expect and what to prepare for, because sometimes you don't get that much notice. So it's good to know in advance what you're likely to be faced with. Next slide, please. So finally, I just wanted to mention that a lot of interviews at the moment are being carried out on remote platforms like Microsoft Teams and Skype. And obviously, this is a very different experience from being interviewed in person. And I think just a few things to bear in mind. So first of all, do take it seriously and treat it like a face-to-face interview. Dress smartly. Make sure that you are being interviewed in as far as possible in the best place that you can. So if you're very busy at work and you're likely to be constantly interrupted, think about being interviewed at home. If you have young children roaming around at home, then try and find somewhere else where you're going to have some peace for the time that your interview is likely to carry on for. We all face technological issues on these platforms, and sometimes things don't go to plan. Certainly, I've been in interviews where half the panel couldn't be seen because they had problems with their bandwidth, and you're then faced with a screen full of initials of people who are maybe not even visible for you. But as far as you can, make sure that you test out the system in advance. You can often ask somebody from medical staffing to do that with you, and feel as confident as you can that at least you can get onto the system. And I talked earlier about getting in touch with panel members and the service. And even if you can't visit in person, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make an effort to contact them, either to speak on the phone or perhaps to have a chat on Zoom, or to go in person if you're able to. Right, I'm going to hand back to Simon. So next slide, please.
Thank you. So if you've got the job, great. If you haven't, well, really, it's important to get as much feedback as possible. There should be a designated panel member for you to talk to, and really pump them for information so you can help the next time. If you do get the job, mentoring is becoming more widespread. A lot of trusts now are offering it. Personally, having mentored some previous sort of higher trainees who've gone to a different trust, I think it's good to try and get one from another trust. In one example, there was a lot of medical politics involved, and I think he felt very happy that I wasn't in the trust he was working in. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of us will get anxious before interviews, and it's good to get a degree of anxiety that's motivating, but it can be a lot. And over the years, I've come across a lot of trainees, often really good trainees, who have let themselves down at interview because they got really over anxious. And I think if you can sort of remember your CBT, I think it's possible for you to do a little CBT on yourself about this. I've certainly done it with some trainees, and it has been at times successful. I think part of the problem is our medical training, and that we're obviously trained to be perfectionists, always to know everything, never to get anything wrong. And I think it brings out some of these specific cognitive errors. So if you think back to your absolutist thoughts, we often have a belief that we should answer every question immediately. Well, clearly, if you were on the panel, think about it, you're not going to expect somebody to immediately come out with an absolutely wonderful answer without thinking about it for a few seconds. Another one that I think is quite common for those people who suffer from performance anxiety is this idea that they come across excessively nervous and it's going to count against them. Quite often it's things like blushing or trembling. And one of the good things about doing a mock interview is you can get some feedback, and the chances are people will tell you, you didn't look that nervous. Mind reading. Now, if you remember from those who taught the CASC, you can't help but sometimes look at the examiner to see, you know, what's their expression, but you cannot tell. How many times have you been in an interview or been to an exam and you've thought you failed and you haven't? So the important thing is to try and stop yourself doing these things, because it's easy to let yourself in the interview sort of drift onto these thoughts, but try and beforehand be clear that you're not going to allow yourself to do that, to not look at the examiners in trying to judge them. Couple more, next slide, please. If you remember selective abstraction, where you take one thing and blow it up, and yes, you will get things wrong in a question, but it doesn't mean that you've lost the whole answer. And again, to try and nip in the bud if you're starting to ruminate when you are in the interview. And of course, sometimes you just may answer a question quite badly, but you still might have the interview. But if you ruminate on it and generalize that you've lost it. So all I'm suggesting is beforehand, if you do suffer quite a bit from anxiety, think about what thoughts you're quite likely to get, talk it through with a friend, do a sort of bit of a practice, and just try and make sure that during the interview you don't allow yourself to drift into ruminating about these questions. Next slide, please. These are a couple of books that I think are pretty good. There may well be others. First one's from the BMA. It's a short book. The second one is more comprehensive, but it really does have a lot of good ideas about structuring questions, particularly those on management that are general to any specialty. Next slide, please. Finally, you know, as we all know, preparation is crucial. The more preparation you do, the more knowledge you have at the interview, the more confident you'll feel. Practice, please, you know, get out and practice with friends, do mock interviews. And I think finally, the thing that always comes across to people who've done a lot of interviews is that enthusiasm really is probably one of the biggest attributes, particularly if you've got two candidates that are pretty equal. You know, you're going to be more attracted to the candidate who really wants the job. So thank you very much for joining us, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Receiving a complaint or being involved in a serious incident is one of the most stressful and anxiety-provoking events, and facing them as a new consultant can be even more daunting. Therefore, we have introduced a new topic in this year's event titled Coping with Suicide, Complaints and Serious Incidents as a New Consultant. And doing this talk on this very pertinent topic is Dr. Rachel Gibbons, a consultant psychiatrist and a consultant medical psychotherapist who is the current chair of the working group on the effects of suicide and homicide on psychiatrists at the Royal College. Here is Dr. Rachel Gibbons.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everybody. I'm here, and one thing I want to say, I'm looking at myself now, but one thing I want to say is that I'm the chair of a new working group on the effect of suicide and homicide on psychiatrists in the Royal College. And the working group said, look, you know, we need to get this in to StartWell, because this is something, it's actually a very lively working group at the moment. And when I started as a consultant quite a few years ago, there was no talking about the effect of this on psychiatrists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you my presentation, and I will talk through this. I've got the joy, it's sort of joyous of talking with this. I'm not going to just talk about serious incidents and suicide. I'm also going to talk about complaints as a new consultant as well. Have the opportunity to talk to you about it. So I'm going, just in a quick summary, I'm going to quickly tell you a bit about why I'm qualified to do this talk, a bit about suicide, a bit about what I've learned about it, a bit about complaints, and then briefly how to prepare and what helps. So my first year, this is why I'm qualified. I think I've got my, you know, I can say that I'm qualified to do this talk. So in my first year, so I became a consultant in 2008, and my first job was an inpatient consultant. And I was so pleased to get this job. I'd been working hard at dual trained in psychotherapy, so it'd been a long haul in my what was then SPR years. I was really looking forward to having a consultant job, and I was very pleased to get this job. So I started on the ward. Within 2 weeks, after 2 weeks, I had my first death of a patient by suicide. In my third week, I had my second death of a patient by suicide. And at that point, I felt very much like I was under a tsunami wave. Very difficult to describe unless you've been through it. But I felt like, I mean, I was apparently still functioning, and I'm not sure people would have known from what was going on the outside, but inside I was in a state of abject panic and disconnection, and not trusting anything I did, or any of my clinical confidence. All my clinical confidence had gone. And then later in that year, we had a very nasty inpatient suicide as well. So this is it. So in my first year, I had 3 patients die by suicide, 3 serious incident investigations, and 3 coroner's court appearances. It felt like I spent the whole of my first year going from one of these, you know, coping with one bit of these processes to another. But what really, and at that time, nobody really talked about it. I felt very ashamed. I felt there was something I was actually bringing. I must be bringing this to psychiatry. There must be something toxic that I was somehow bringing this. I felt ashamed, humiliated, that my colleagues would be looking at me thinking, why did we give her this job? There's something wrong with her. Very difficult to talk to anybody at that time. Very isolated. But luckily enough, I met 2 of my consultant colleagues who'd been there longer than I had. And they'd had very similar experiences in the previous year. One had had 6 deaths, one had had 4. And we got together sort of, it was a bit like, again, being under a wave. You grab hold of each other for life, and one of you's got a tree and you're holding on to it and just hoping the water level's going to go down. And then we got Rob Hale, who was the director of the Portman and had been very involved in suicide, to come and join us sort of confidentially and rather secretly at that time. We sort of had to have this group secretly for what we now call the Consultant Suicide Group that we have. And it's been going now for 12 years. And initially for the first year, we just met on a monthly basis to talk through and process our own trauma. And gradually over that year, the water level went down. And I remember this feeling of suddenly, or sort of, it felt like quite suddenly feeling that I could breathe again and that I was standing on dry land. So, you know, but these experiences in my first year, also in my first year, 1 GMC complaint and about 6 formal complaints. So I think for a first year, I mean, this was also at the time where there was a lot of emphasis, there was a lot of relatively new emphasis on patient complaints. So you had departments which weren't called patient advice and complaints, weren't called PALS, they were called patient complaint services. So it was all about complaints. And the complaints department used to come onto the ward with, it was an inpatient ward with extremely unwell psychotic patients. And they would say, look, to nip the complaints in the bud, we're going to ask the patients whether they've got any complaints at all, just to nip them in the bud. So they were asking really quite severely disturbed patients whether they had any complaints. And so in my inbox every day formally, you know, very frequently, I get a formal complaint from a patient on the ward, which was totally psychotic in content, which is not to say all complaints are psychotic in content, but these ones were, and I had to respond to them as though they weren't. The GMC complaint also a very challenging experience, particularly at that time. It was relatively soon after shipment. And again, I'm bringing this not to frighten anybody, I'm still here, but this was also a different time. We are in a different time. The GMC is much more of is aware now of managing things in a different way than they were at that time. But what I learned from this is that and I learned very much from the suicide group, is the only way out is through. You have to, you know, it isn't easy and it is painful, but the pain does pass and you learn a lot from it. And having these experiences in my first 3 weeks, but in my first year, has determined my whole direction of travel for my consultant career, is that now I've been working on suicide for the past 12 years. And it is what I do in 1/3 or a quarter of my time every single week. And now I'm, you know, chair of the patient safety group at the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the chair of the working group on the effect of suicide and homicide on psychiatrists. So this, you know, this has determined my career. And just to say a bit about my experience since then, and these are things that I've done, pursued really in my, if you like, in my special interest time. So I was a suicide lead for Barnet, Enfield and Haringey. I was the clinical lead for the British Transport Police suicide prevention team, a founder member of the Haringey Suicide Prevention Group. I've been doing research on suicide, writing papers. We had a paper in the Bulletin published last year with the Oxford Centre for Suicide Research on the effect of suicide on psychiatrists. Led the suicide strategy nationally for the Priory Group, and actually done a lot of other things. But one of the things that's most important is I did suicide audits in every trust I've been in and looked at all the coroner's records of completed suicide for a year in our local coroner's office. Really important. So what I'm going to share with you, because I think it's important that I do, so you head into this experience with some knowledge, I think, and I'm going to share with you what I've learned about suicide from this work, and just in real headlines, so you get an idea about it. So, and this is what I've learned. It doesn't mean that this is anybody else's truth. This is just what's mine, what I'm learning, and I'm going to share that with you. Okay, so this is a very formative meeting I had with the chaplain of Beachy Head. And this is a quote. This is something he said to me at that time. He said, to help a truly suicidal person, you have to approach them with an open heart. If you're worried about the risk their action poses to you, they're more likely to jump, which is a really, on 2 levels, I think this has been a very defining quote for me, that about what does it mean to really approach someone who's truly suicidal with an open heart, and how that might be the real goal of when you meet somebody. I mean, not just someone who's truly suicidal, but someone in immense emotional distress. How do you approach them with an open heart? But then the real complex area we have within mental health services, if we're worried about how their action is going to pose a risk to us, which I think we are concerned about this in mental health, and there may be some sort of systemic issues that contribute to this, and how that might then get in the way of actually open-hearted engagement. And I was talking to the chaplain at Beachy Head just last week, because I'm still, and confirming that they still said this. I just want to check, that this is the quote, that I've heard it right, and this is absolutely right, and I've been attributing it right. And they said, yes, that's absolutely what we feel. So these are the sort of 8 facts or truths about homicide and suicide. These are my truths and facts. So that suicide and homicide are not accidents. They result from complex and probably universal mental mechanisms that are unconscious, and we don't understand them, and we cannot predict them. So I think this is something that's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to deal with the uncertainty. When someone dies by suicide, or someone kills someone else, I think it's very difficult to know exactly why that's happened. And that uncertainty, because, I mean, if you take a case of a suicide, the person that could answer that isn't there anymore. But even if they were, they may well not know. So when we've met with people who have made very serious attempts on their life and have survived, they often didn't know they were going to do it. So if they can't predict it themselves, that leaves us in a difficult position. So the person that could tell us a bit about why it's happened isn't there anymore. So we're left with, in an utter uncertain place. And I think then we tend to make up narratives. We're narrative beasts. Human beings are narrative beasts. So we make up narratives about why something's happened. And then we cling to those narratives with total certainty, because they're the only thing that sort of holds us together. That both suicide and homicide appear to be either impulsive or premeditated. So you have with suicide, so for example, you quite frequently see it, and you can see these clips on YouTube of someone being saved in this situation, but of someone having an argument on a phone, and then a train comes along and they jump in front of the train. So it can appear to be impulsive. PhD student, anxious about her PhD, going on a train to her PhD viva, jumps in front of a train. So arguments, suicide in the midst of an argument, after an argument, you see a lot. So of what appear to be, and I'm using the word appear to be because I give a different talk on the pathway to suicide, which even those that might appear to be might not be wholly, but appear to be either impulsive or premeditated. And some clearly look premeditated. It looks like someone might have been planning their own death for months in advance, sometimes when you examine the records afterwards. So that leaves us in a complex place. The other thing I was going to say is it also that on occasion people can be very, very determined and be very creative in the way that they take their life. That this is a really complex one. I mean, in some ways it's very simple and very obvious, but my word, I've argued this a lot in my life with other psychiatrists, is as a psychiatrist, you do not know what's going on in someone else's mind. You do not know, unless they absolutely tell you. But in a lot of cases, they don't know themselves. Yeah, so you don't know. So if you don't know, if someone doesn't tell you, you're not going to really know. And the trouble is that when someone has died by suicide, what happens is you create a narrative of what's happened, and you tend to put yourself in the protagonist role, and you'll rewrite the history from the immense shock you feel when you find out. You'll rewrite the history within 20 minutes that you did know and that you had a major role in this, but you don't. And also that these events are rare. Both suicide and homicide result from the human condition and not from a mental health condition. So I think there's something about, in mental health, we can try and grab these to ourselves, but actually the majority of suicide and homicide do not occur in the mental health population. So at least sort of around 75% of those that die by suicide have had no contact with mental health services in the previous year. That suicide and probably homicide appear to result from an incapacity to mourn. So one thing that you do see as an etiological factor, although it's not very clearly defined, is a loss event, usually a couple of loss events before a death. So there might be a big one, and people will say, oh, we never really got over the death of his mother. But then often there's a smaller loss event before the death. That suicide prevention, so people can hear me and think I'm sort of saying that suicide prevention isn't valid. That's not at all. I absolutely totally sign up and believe in suicide prevention, but it's a public health issue. It can't rely on individual predictability, because also what we know is that risk assessments do not predict death by suicide. The majority of patients, and just the patient group that die by suicide, have been rated as low risk at the last risk assessment. So suicide prevention is a public health issue. So reduction in access to means reduces the suicide rate. And what I truly believe about suicide prevention is that it's an acting out event. Suicide is an acting out event, and I think homicide is as well, that you act out when you can't put something into words. So talking about it reduces the risk. So if we can talk about it, if we learn a good vocabulary and a good confidence in talking about it amongst ourselves and with patients, then I think it's very likely to reduce the risk. Also, if we can work with our own trauma, if we're somehow repressing and hiding our own trauma, then we tend to act that out as well. So we could be feeding into a system, making it more unstable. Now, the final fact or truth, which I'm going to really kick out there for you to take with you into your into this transition, into the start of your consultant career, is that the most important point is no one is to blame for someone else's death by suicide. And I really, really believe this. Okay, now blame is a non-mentalizing word. It's if you work in mentalizing personality disorder services, it's one of those words that you look out for as to identify that someone is in a non-mentalizing state of mind. The blame is a black and white word. It's either you or me. Please let it be you. It reduces something, and it means that there's no capacity to think about something. So if we think that blame as a word has no value in any meaningful value other than just something projective, and to contain and to scapegoat because we're anxious, and the whole nature of a death by suicide or a death by homicide creates so much anxiety, we all lose our capacity to mentalize. There are very powerful scapegoating forces released in that, and that can be a huge relief temporarily. Phew, we found the source of the problem, got rid of them. And that's not any mature, thoughtful way of learning from something. A more mentalizing word is something called responsibility. So responsibility allows for a diffuse or multiple different contributive factors, including from the person themselves. So there might be multiple layers of responsibility, and we might have some responsibility that we need to think about, but that is not blame. Most important point, nobody is to blame for someone else's death by suicide. Okay, so I'm going to take a breath there before just moving into complaints. So I'll move into complaints then. So just a little bit about complaints. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of psychiatrists. So as a psychiatrist, we play the role very often as the much needed bad object, that for someone to recover from being unwell, you know, if we think about children when they're growing up and separating, they often need someone they can be very angry with and tell them they're terrible and I hate you and you're terrible. Well, that's often our role. And that's a really, really important and valuable role. The bad object is a very, very important role, privileged role to have. So that's often what we are, and we need to be able to do that and hold on to that and not get too identified with that we are bad or we've done something wrong or we you know, there's something negative about us. That actually is that sometimes we're needed to hold the difficult thing, to say the difficult thing, and to be able to be kicked a bit. But that doesn't mean we have to identify too much with that. So given that, you know, given that that's our role, then it's a bit of a tautological issue that actually we're very vulnerable to complaints. Now, if we're the bad object, we're quite likely to get complaints. Now, actually, you get complaints, you know, when you've done something right. You know, sometimes, and this is certainly something I've learned in my career, is sometimes when I say the right thing and hit the nail on the head, if you like, sometimes I will get a complaint about that, that will come from the psychotic side of the personality, that's sort of fighting for its life, if you like. So complaints do not mean that you have failed. And as doctors, somehow we're extremely focused on failure, and failure also is a non-mentalizing word. That we're very focused on that. And I remember when I first had my first complaint as an SHO, going into my consultant in tears at that time totally overwhelmed with this complaint. And he said to me, Rachel, just have a look at the side of my chair. And there was all these files up, to shoulder height. And he said, those are my complaints going through at the moment. And I thought, wow, okay. So it was really actually very helpful. It was frightening at the time, but actually really helpful in retrospect. That's also part of our job. That complaints can come from the psychotic side of the personality and can be focused on you when you get something right. Now, sometimes, systemic complaints about the system are one thing, but if you get personally directed complaints, it can be what's called a psychic attack. Okay, so, and again, there's something about being able to stand up to that and say that this isn't okay, which is important. And the organizational systems can amplify these attacks sometimes. So it's hard to hold on to sanity. So in the example I was giving you about getting all these complaints from the ward, the organization was amplifying these complaints. So, and that isn't to say that all are, but I do think we have to hold in mind that the complaints can be, and it's a difficult thing for us to talk about, and to not feel, and to try and stand back and look at it and think, what does this complaint actually really mean? How are we really going to think about this? So will serious incidents, patient suicide and complaints affect you? Well, yes, but it's part of the psychiatric role. It is part of our role. Depending on where you work, if you're working in crisis teams, it's going to be more than this. But depending on where you work, you could probably expect around 4 patient deaths by suicide in your working lifetime. There's a variable emotional response, I think, depending on, in a way, the role you're having with the patient that dies, and what they mean to you. It can be a very, we can resonate very much in some cases. It will affect you, but it's not about you. And this is a very big issue. And I hear people talk about, which I do a lot now, the deaths of their patients by suicide. Very often they'll start telling me the story, but they won't tell me the story of the patient. They'll tell me their story. They get very confused with the story of the patient, and how to separate the two things. So it will affect you, but it's not about you. It will bring up your stuff and give you a good opportunity to work with it, and through it, and to grow. So very painful. It's something you don't want, but it is part of our job, part of our life as a psychiatrist, and does give us an opportunity to grow as clinicians and as human beings. So what helps? Preparation. So if you try and close your eyes, turn away and think, oh, no, it's not going to happen to me, I don't think that makes sense. I think preparation, and in the working group, and what I circulated to you before is a booklet, a bit about it, to have a bit of a think about it before, see it as part of your role, get installed in your life reflective spaces. So these will be incredibly helpful when you have difficult experiences, but reflective spaces are the key to survival. Engage in serious incident processes. So if you can investigate a serious incident in your trust before you have one, that can be extremely helpful, and it stops you projecting into the process and the investigators yourself. Attend workshops and events. Afterwards, take it seriously, take the effect on you seriously, is what I mean by that. And in the study that we did, that we published, what we found is that so many psychiatrists said it had a very serious emotional effect on them, but they didn't take any time off. They didn't look to their own vulnerability and what their needs might be, and they didn't care for themselves. So really take time off if needed. Look at resources like the one I've sent you. I'll tell you a little bit about other resources. Look to support from others. Because of the sense of shame that gets projected after this sort of death, you can find yourself withdrawing from others rather than talking to them, but actually hugely beneficial, people say, is actually getting over that and connecting with other people, and really look after yourself. It's really important. What I certainly have learned, and a lot of my colleagues have learned, looking after yourself again, and reflective spaces linked with this, are key to having a healthy, creative, enjoyable working life. So the other thing, contribute to changing the culture of your organization. Bring sanity to your organizations. Don't expect the organization to look after you. I was hugely disillusioned in my first year. I expected to be looked after, and I wasn't looked after in the way that I wanted to. You have to look after yourself and contribute to your organization and look after your colleagues. And that meaningful jobs are very rarely easy. And that's the truth of it, but it is a very meaningful job, a total privilege. Don't be a hero. You're part of a team, which is part of a system. So just finally, just to put you in touch with some of the resources that we have, there's going to be a conference on the 22nd of October on the effect of suicide and homicide on psychiatrists. We've got a web page now at the Royal College of Psychiatrists website. It's under supporting you, members supporting you, and then there's a bit about if patient dies by suicide, where there are resources to read, but there's also films we've done of psychiatrists talking about the effect of the death of a patient on them, but also working with families afterwards, how to talk to suicidal patients, creative conversations about suicide. So we're getting the resources there, and I wish that these resources had been there when I had these experiences. We're writing also guidance for trusts, which hopefully will be out by the end of the year, about working after these events. We're looking for systemic change, move away from any sort of blaming, no scapegoating, a drive for suicide groups and reflective practice, family bereavement services, and suicide leads. And this is the booklet I've sent you. So please do hold on to that. You may need it. You're quite likely to need it at some point, and I wish I'd had it.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbons. Our next speaker is Dr. Jeff Marston, a retired consultant psychiatrist in intellectual disabilities with a very long experience of coaching and mentoring. His talk is titled, Getting the Most Out of Mentoring and Coaching, Enhancing Personal Resilience and Wellbeing. Over to you, Dr. Marston.
Hi, my name's Jeff Marston. I'm a recently retired intellectual disability consultant, and until June was the lead for coaching and mentoring in the West Midlands. Today I'd like to talk to you about the role of mentoring during your career, and also touching on concepts of resilience and well-being. Over the next 30 minutes, I'd like to put coaching and mentoring to a bit of context, and then talk about resilience and well-being, talk about the role of mentoring and coaching, touch on where to find out more, and give you some useful links as to where you can find things, and then also encourage you to think about what it is you'd like to do next in your career, and also what you'd like to do about mentoring and or coaching. So, just to put into some context, the issues that we're all facing at the minute, and I think it's been highlighted particularly during this COVID pandemic, is that we as doctors are highly resilient and very coping people, but we will find difficulties in our careers from time to time. And Professor Michael West and Dane Coyer looked at about how do we support doctors for the GMC in 2018, and they came up with an ABC approach to our needs. And first of all, looking at how we've developed more autonomy and control, so needing a voice, influence, fairness in the workplace, good working conditions and good working schedules and rotas, a sense of belonging. And I think this is particularly emphasised by the pandemic, isn't it? As we've worked as teams and survived as teams, so we need to belong, and there needs to be a good culture and leadership within that to help us with that. And again, this is where mentoring and coaching can play a role, and we need competence as well, so that we need workloads that are tolerable for us. So these are just some of the things they were pointing out in 2018. The BMA then went on to do the Caring for the Mental Health of the Medical Workforce document, and emphasised that high rates of burnout, risk of burnouts in doctors, that up to 80% of doctors might be at risk, that mental health diagnoses over the lifetime are quite prevalent as well, and up to 7% of doctors will have a mental health condition in the last year when surveyed, and that 40% of doctors report suffering when they're surveyed. They also showed up the fact that doctors weren't quite sure about where to find help, even though there is plenty of help out there, and I'll come to this at the end of the talk. They talked about three elements to sort of developing supports for doctors. So building supportive culture within the NHS. So this is for doctors, medical students, and all NHS staff, valuing people and trying to prevent causes of ill health, enhancing access to support as well. So improving awareness of services for people, and encouraging us to look after ourselves and to look after each other. And again, I think the pandemic has highlighted the need for this. Then went on the NHS Staff and Learners Mental Wellbeing Commission in 2019 through Health Education England. And they highlighted again the actual physical costs of sickness in the NHS are up to £2,000 a year per person. It showed out high rates of depression amongst training grade doctors, so up to about 30%, and listing factors that might influence people's experience, which included stigma about talking about mental health. And they offered 33 recommendations to try and address the well-being of people working in the NHS, and one of those was around developing wellbeing guardians and leaders within each trust. So people there specifically to try and plan and support people practicing in the NHS. So what is wellbeing? You can describe it as a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. Seligman describes well-being as having a positive emotional state, being engaged, having positive relationships, having meaning, and also finding accomplishment as well in your career or in your personal life. Resilience, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, and significant sources of stress, and that could have very different ways of doing that. So it's a dynamic process of adaptation, and it's in the context of adversity, and it's this ability to fail and to learn from failure. So taking forward positive issues even when things have been difficult. Specific to psychiatrists, there's Ranjita Howard and co. Looked at systematic reviews of personal resilience in psychiatrists, and they found a number of protective factors, particularly around workplace, so discrete working, time management, job planning and setting agendas, making sure that you're able to delegate and having extended roles. Again, coming back to a very supportive culture is useful, and the connectedness, so being part of a team and having networks of people. And again, all these are things that sort of can fit into the mentoring concept. Having psychological support where needed, and having constructive and positive feedback, so as part of appraisals maybe, or part of other feedback loops as well. Then obviously the personal side of things, if you're needing it and you've got your own issues, counselling may help. Being reflective, being self-aware, looking after yourself, so learning how to take care of yourself, and also training around general skills, and those might be general life skills, or in the work context it may be sort of personal CPD and personal development around specific skills that you may feel that you need to expand on. And then in the sort of life context as well, making sure that you have breaks, time away from work, that you're able to switch off when you leave your work, having a supportive family, having things to do that interest you that aren't medical, so having hobbies and other interests. And again, if you're in a partnership, having a supportive partnership relationship. And we're all aware that over the last months and years, we've been living in a time of pandemic. And if you're not aware already, that I'm sure you are, there's a number of free webinars on the college site that cover well-being, resilience, and sort of how to look after yourselves. So I won't go into them in detail, but I was going to talk about one a little bit later from Richard Duggins. And that was in May 2020, and I've given you the link there on the slide. But Dr. Duggins was talking about resilience, and how to sort of keep a healthy lifestyle and work balance during difficult times. And he talked about the performance cliff, where doctors will be reasonably functional and well in themselves over the course of up to two years, having little dips and then recovering, but being functional at work, until at some point they hit a cliff, as he describes it, where the level of functioning and mental health deteriorates quite rapidly, and sometimes unexpectedly for both the doctor and their colleagues. But the encouraging thing is that once a person's hit that cliff, that they do recover quite quickly if they seek the right supports. So the important thing he was talking about is how do you, on that plateau period, recognise that, and then also do something about that in time. So rather than prioritising work and withdrawing from people, reaching out, recognising that you're having difficulties and talking to people may be one thing to be doing. Looking at how you cope with adversity. And again, these are areas that we can cover in mentoring and coaching. Reflecting on your own personality and how you interact there, and also looking at the organisational cultures, because these can be things that will help us during that plateau period to avoid things deteriorating. And he talked about Laura Dunn's concept of having a pressure cooker, where the stresses and conflicts and the demands that are being put into you are challenging your coping reserve and challenging your personality and temperamental factors, supported by your own psychological support and psychosocial supports where needed, healthy activities and lifestyle. Mentorship there again as put down as a support, and being stimulated and having an interest and enjoying your work. And the outcome from this pressure cooker could be the whole thing either blows up and that's turned into burnout, or that we learn to cope and learn to adapt, and that builds our resilience. So I'd highly recommend that sort of 20-minute video to watch. So where does StartWell and mentoring and coaching fit into all this? I think it fits in the mentoring and coaching side of things really well, because it sort of embodies a lot of the issues that you will be facing at the start of your career as a consultant, or at times of change within the NHS or system or health systems, wherever you're working. What does the GMC also say about mentoring? Again, that we should be willing to take part in mentoring schemes if they're offered by our employers, and that doctors with extra responsibilities should be willing to take on mentoring roles for more junior staff and other health professionals as well. And that if you have agreed to act as a mentor, that we actually are competent to do that role and to take on some training as needed, and to be appropriately skilled for that. So again, I'll cover some of these aspects later on in the talk. So, I mean, what are mentoring and what is coaching? I'm going to predominantly talk around mentoring, because that is what the Royal College of Psychiatrists is aiming to provide for all levels of psychiatrists in the UK and in every region they're in. But what we're looking at is developing the skills of mentors by employing coaching style techniques. So I'm going to talk about coaching techniques a little bit as well. So I predominantly use the word mentoring, but coaching may pop in there every now and again. But really, both coaching and mentoring are learning relationships, where they're helping people to take charge of their own development, release potential and achieve results which they value. That's one definition there. So the key words there are learning, development and results. So future focus. We're looking at the future to develop yourself as a doctor and to progress your career. So if you go to Clutterbuck and Megginson, they talk about 3 roles of a mentor, which are largely distinctive but often incompatible. So within that, they describe one role as a coach. So you're helping people to acquire specific skills. you're helping to resolve short-term problems, and you might be looking to try and help the person to make specific changes in behaviour that are noted to be impeding them. You're also acting as an elder statesman, so you've got experience. You could be acting as a role model. You may help with the networking, and we talked earlier about the connectiveness being a helpful factor in building resilience. And also you can act as a sounding board for ideas in a safe, reflective space. And that comes on to the next issue, which is the role of the reflective mentor. So a mentor may help you to look at recurring patterns of behaviour. You know, why have you continued to get stuck in an area, or what's helped you to develop before in a particular area. They may help you to create insight and self-awareness. So again, listening and reflecting with a person to help try and create insight. To help people develop their own ways of interacting with others and solving problems. So a good mentor won't be telling you what to do. A good mentor won't be saying, look at me, aren't I great, do what I do. They'll be helping you to be you and to develop your own self and confidence, and to address issues in your own way. So building self-understanding to help you with your future career. So they're really just offering you a map. So here's a Sustrans cycle route. I love to cycle, but if I want to go from Chipping Campden and cycle across to Southwold, there are so many different ways I could go. But there'll be my ways, the ones that I choose. So I might value the scenery and the quiet roads, or I might value the speed and want to go on the busy straight roads. So whichever way still gets me from A to B, and it's up to my preferences how I do that. But the important thing is that coming back to the mentor, they are helping you to plan ahead, to think through, and to challenge yourself in a positive way, so that you can make that journey safely. So how does mentoring benefit us? I mean, it can help us with our relationships, it can help to build trust, it can be a facilitative process, and it's a confidential time for you to reflect on yourself. It's purely about you, it's not about the coach, it's not about the mentor, it's about you. It can help unstick your thinking and your beliefs, your emotions, again, in a safe space where you're not going to be judged, where the person isn't going to bring their own agenda to you. It's an opportunity to reflect with another, somebody who may have experience of something that you're going through. And that can be unconscious or conscious reflection. It can be reflective time to think about what's been going well for you. Why is that so? If things haven't been going so well, you know, what could be the issues around that? And maybe encouraging you to rate that. So things could be going really badly. They're sort of, 9 out of 10 in the catastrophe scale, or they could be, not too bad, 3 or 4. So trying to think about how bad is bad or how good is good. It can help with career direction, looking at yourself, your roles, and hoping to maximize your contribution to your team and to your area of work. It can be helpful in looking at leadership skills and styles, and developing your leadership, and a lot of good organizations have a leadership structure that's very much based around a coaching and mentoring culture, so that people feel safe in that workspace. It's about output, so it's trying to put thoughts into action. What's stopping you from doing this? If you are going to do this, what could be the impacts on other areas of your life? It might be around helping problem solving and forward planning. And again, the word is forward planning. It's thinking about actions in the future and moving forward. And it may help us with adaptability and coping with change. And we know that in the NHS, change is frequent, and that could be just within the structures and the general churn of the NHS, or it could be, something catastrophic out of the blue, like a pandemic that forces change upon us rapidly, and we just have to adapt, because that is part of what we do as medics and leaders. So there's a personal and professional overlap that we can have benefits from. So it can be around our clinical practice, patient care, consultation, and sometimes we can use coaching, mentoring skills in our relationships with patients. And that's the one great thing about psychiatrists as mentors and coaches, that they have a lot of the skill sets there already that make for a good mentor or coach. It can help us manage change and problem solve. It can, again, help us with relationships, job satisfaction, confidence. On the well-being front, again, we can integrate lifestyle and discussions around that, and so it may be helpful for personal well-being and a sense of collegiality as well for us. And in our development, obviously, the mentoring in the context of the Royal College is about sort of work-based mentoring. So it's helping us to develop our roles as psychiatrists, and we'll use those skills in many aspects of our roles, including things like appraising other people, developing and personal education, and educating others as well, and our leadership styles as well. So all of these skills are helpful to us. So this is just to remind me that coaching and mentoring can be helpful throughout the spectrum of your career, from medical student to retiree. And it has potential value at many stages, particularly transition points, like promotion. Some of you coming today will be becoming new consultants or thinking about becoming new consultants at the end of your training. Other people may be taking on new management roles. We may be looking to prepare for something. So, if you've got your consultant interviews coming up, you may be interested in some of the other videos here, but coaching and mentoring can have a role in preparation for those actions as well. For somebody, say, my spectrum of career is planning for retirement. What are you going to be doing next? Those sort of things. So any sort of preparation around transition points. It can be helpful to think about organisational and service changes as well. And again, if you've got a mentor with a lot of experience, they may be able to dip into some of their sort of knowledge there as the elder statesman. Many of us may end up being redeployed either within our trusts or outside of trusts. And this again has been highlighted by pandemics and some of the concerns that people have about sort of acting outside of their roles. So sometimes mentoring or coaching specifically from somebody in an area that we might be moving to, it could be a helpful thing. Whistleblowing and other traumatic experiences, again, mentoring may be a helpful sort of crutch, an add-on in that situation. And again, particularly vulnerable groups as well, it may help to equalise the differential attainment gap there for some of those groups. And then again, at the college, we're sort of very much looking to sort of develop mentoring support for all colleagues, from sort of training grades through to SAS grades, through to consultant grades, and in all of the groups as well. So what are the principles behind effective mentoring? I've mentioned in the definition already that at the heart of everything is the learning relationship between two people, and I can speak as a mentor and a coach that I learn as much from the experiences I have. I think hopefully as much as other people will take away learning from our sessions. So the client is the person that leads everything. So it'll be you, if you're wanting to be mentored, that will lead the process. The coach or your mentor will be there to facilitate and help you with that process. The context will obviously be around work, but will also touch on lifestyle and all those other things as well that I've talked about. The outcome is going to be future focused, and it's about change in a positive way for you. I'll talk about approaches and models later on, but basically it's looking at trying to have some sort of structure where change can happen. The skill set of the mentor is what will help facilitate the process, and that's where we talk about coaching skills within mentoring. So things like actively listening, about being able to challenge in an empathic and supportive way, being there for the person, not taking your own agenda into any relationship, not being judgmental. Those are important skills. And again, I said, as a psychiatrist, we have a lot of those active listening skills already in our tool sets as well. So, you know, psychiatrists can make very effective mentors. And the qualities of the coach will be the thing that will hope and mentor will hopefully spring things forward for the person that they're coaching and mentoring. And all this is set within an ethical framework which provides a safe space that's confidential and that the person who's having the mentoring feels confident with and trusting in. So I've mentioned briefly potential models. I mean, at the college we talk about the GROW model, which was Sir John Whitmore's concept. And really it's just to provide a structure within sessions to help us to think about issues and to move things forward. So it starts off by looking at what your goals are. So what do you want from this session? What is it you're trying to do? And that again is the mentee is the person that brings that agenda to the meeting. What's the aim? What's the purpose and the objective of the meeting? Or sessions, a number of meetings. Reality is then challenging, well, what's the current state of affairs? You know, what information have you got available? So what's it like now? And where, you know, so where we know where we want it to be, but what's it like now? So how then could we break down that sort of change into smaller doable steps that will get us to the goal that we're hoping for? The options is, what are the possibilities out there? Because I've shown you the map already of the different ways to get from Chipping Campden over to the Norfolk coast. You know, but how are you going to do that? How do you want that to fit in? So there'll be lots of different possibilities out there. Some of them will be great possibilities, others might not be so great. So, and it's the possibilities and the options that you want, not what your mentee wants, the mentor wants. So it's making sure that those options are the right ones for you. And then the final part of the structure is defining a way forward. So that's about action. What are you going to do? When are you going to do that? And how will you know you've got there? When are you going to report back on that? So it's sort of setting you know, targets for yourself that then could be maybe, you know, the next session could be reviewed and to see where you've got to. So there's the idea of putting in a model into the mentoring process. And there are a number of different coaching models out there. So this is just one example. This is the one that the college tends to use in their training. So, you know, if you're going to be a mentee, what can you bring to the party to make things to work best for you? So the first thing I would say is find the right person for you. Do you want a coach to work on a short-term issue with, or do you want a mentor to build a relationship with over the couple of years or so, which is what we would recommend within the college? Do you want somebody from within your organisation that you're going to be working for, where there might be conflict of interest? Do you want your line manager to be your mentor as well? Or do you want to go outside of your organisation to find somebody that's neutral and not involved in the politics there? And that's something that, you know, from the college would recommend, trying to look for mentors outside of your own organisation to take away some of those conflicts. Know yourself. So think about what it is you want to achieve and being specific about what those things are going to be. You know, what's your personality? How do you learn best? You know, so these are things that we can explore. Various tools out there that you can look at your personality and learning styles, so that you can decide how you work best. So what, you know, are you sort of you work best in sort of theatrical settings, you know, where you're role-playing things? Do you like things in lists? You know, knowing how it comes out. You know, you're a visual learner and you're an auditory learner. Are you able to be mentored or coached over Zoom? You okay with the telephone call? Does it need to be face-to-face? everybody's different, that you're working out how and what's going to be best for you. Have realistic expectations of what's going to happen in a mentoring relationship. Agree a contract before you start. So if we know where we stand as a mentor and as a mentee, then it's much easier to challenge things if it goes astray. So, you know, how often are you going to meet? Where are you going to meet? What length of time are you going to meet? How do you maintain confidentiality? What's going to happen if you meet in a corridor situation? Do you acknowledge the person? Those sorts of things. And by making sure that we have that sort of contract at the beginning, it means that we don't have any problems as we go through that. And also the other thing is that sometimes third parties might want information about mentoring or coaching. You have to agree up front, you know, what's going to happen if somebody approaches, and unless it's agreed up front that other people are going to be involved, there should be nobody else involved. Be strategic, look towards the future and plan for the future, and keep focused so that you're targeting things that are doable and that are going to give you confidence, and build that over time. If you try to take on too much, sometimes it may be difficult and unsatisfying. And be proactive. So you as the mentee, you're going to set the agenda. Your mentor isn't going to do that. They might not even be organising the sessions or where to meet. It might be up to you to do all that sort of thing. So you need to be proactive. It's led by you. It's for you. It's not for your mentor. Be able to take the challenge, because a good mentor will be very supportive, but will also be challenging and asking you insightful questions, powerful questions that may help you think about yourself. So powerful questions would be personal to you. They might resonate with you. They should be sort of acute and incisive. So coming to the point, they should reverberate with you, make you think about that issue. They should be innocent in terms of they're not part of the agenda of the mentor. They're for you only, and they should be explicit in that they're sort of cutting to the chase of where things are. So that's David Clutterbuck talks about prairie questions, and those powerful questions will help us to think through a number of issues. Use the reflective space. Again, it's a two-way process and conversation. So use that reflective space to think about things and to take things forward. Open your imagination. So what could I be? Not what I am now, but what could I be? You've got a starting point, but you could be anything you want. You're amazingly smart people. You're highly resilient people, and that, you know, the world is your oyster. If you set yourself the challenges and are open to action, it will, you know, again, help you to look and identify resources around you. So we work best as teams. We need the support of other people to get through most of our career. So, you know, it's looking at how you make best use of those resources around you. It might help encourage you to be starting thinking about smart working. So being very sort of focused and time limited on what you're going to be doing, and it helps us to set goals and action plans as well. So out of the session may come some homework that you'll need to take forward. So coming on to the end of the talk here, I've talked a little bit about mentoring. I've talked about how it might help and support us throughout our career, but what's out there for you? You could go to your own trust. This is an example from Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership Trust. A lot of trusts now have their own mentoring and coaching structures within the trust, open and accessible to all staff, and not just doctors. So maybe approach the lead in your trust and see what's out there for you. There may be short-term specific coaching available, or you may be able to get yourself a mentor either within the trust, or they may have buddy arrangements with other trusts that you could go and seek support from outside. You can go to the college, and if you go to your regional site in the members area, you should be able to access the mentoring page, which on it should be a list of people that are willing to act as mentors within your region. They may have a pen portrait about themselves so that you can sort of choose who you might want to get in touch with. Then you can apply to your area manager, and they will put you in touch with specific mentors, and then you can agree whether or not it's going to work for you, and whether or not you want to take that forward. And I'd always suggest that you start off the first 1 or 2 sessions are getting to know each other sessions, but to be honest about it. If you have a session with a person and you really think, I'm not compatible with the style of this person, then it's great, and it's okay to say that's the case, and to maybe look for another mentor. That is absolutely fine. Nobody will be hurt by that. And it's just being practical about having a relationship that's going to work for you. On the college website as well, if you go to the PTC site, there's a recent guide to mentoring for psychiatric trainees, which gives a useful overview of what mentoring is, the different types of mentoring that could be available, difference between coaching and mentoring, gives into a bit more detail, and also has some useful references. So I'd recommend going to that. The NHS Leadership Academy as well has a coaching and mentoring collaborative. There are 10 local leadership academies with leads attached to those, and they're there to offer both coaching and mentoring to NHS staff, but they're also recruiting coaches and mentors as well, and provide a framework of CPD and training as well for people that are offering those services. So check out your local leadership academies. They're really quite useful, and that's just the sort of the front page of the local one in the West Midlands. So you can apply for mentoring, or you can apply to be a coach. If you want to pay for some specific coaching, the Faculty of Medical Coaches is accessible there. You will set up a number of sessions, and it may be that you're wanting some specific support around a particular area, but you can contact them and talk through what they have to offer, but you would be paying for that. I've mentioned, as I said, the leadership academies, and they have a lifelong learning process. So they actually have newsletters and resources available that you can do. They will do things like having coaching courses as well. So if you fancy a bit of CPD, or you want to use your protected time as a trainee to develop your coaching skills, you might be able to apply for a course if they've got one local to you, such as the ILM level 5 or 7 courses in coaching, and that will be a certificate that could then last for your lifetime as well. But they have various resources for their coaches and mentors. On e-learning for health, there's a helpful 2-hour video around mentoring and coaching, and it gives a bit more depth than I'm able to do in the sort of the 30 minutes that I've got today. But again, that's worth a look. So at this point, we're coming to the end of my talk. So I'd really just ask the question of you, what do you think you want to do next? So maybe pause the video here, write down a few points, and then I'll talk very briefly about what you could do. Again, as a mentor, I'll not be telling you what to do or imposing my thoughts on you. These are all what you would like to be doing. So you could, as I said, check out your local mentoring scheme. You could also talk to your trust about what they're going to be doing about coaching or mentoring and well-being, and how they're going to address differential attainment within the trust, if those are things that they're not doing already. You could make sure that mentoring gets on your job description and gets discussed at job planning. Because when you apply for a consultant role, within the sort of job description, there should be on all areas a section about well-being and talking about mentoring and coaching, and suggesting that you take part in that. So when you've got your job, that might be something you want to make sure that you've got planned in, so that it does happen and you feel that it's protected and valued, that you're not just cramming it in somewhere. You may research also what's around you locally in terms of support, or nationally, and on the next slide I've got a number of links to some of the national resources. But again, we're hoping that your career will go smoothly, that you will have the support from your teams, from your colleagues, from your trusts in your work, such that you will have a healthy and happy work experience. But again, it's useful to know if things aren't quite going right, where can we find support for ourselves? And I would suggest as well putting coaching and mentoring skills on your personal development plan at some point, because those skills could be very useful for you, as I've discussed, in many different domains. So these are some of the wellbeing resources that are out there. There are many more as well. So I've already talked about the college resources page in the webinars. There's been a series about wellbeing, and they're very well worth a look. NHS Practitioners Health have put together an amazing array of supports for all NHS workers, so it's again worth looking at that site to see what's out there. You can get free counselling and peer support through the BMA with organisations, charitable organisations such as the Doctor Support Network as well, that are there for you if you need people to talk to in a confidential way. And I've mentioned the wellbeing hubs around the country as well to look at. And within the college, you've got the psychiatric support service as well, and they've got a whole raft of information about things that you can access. And again, you can always ring up and have confidential conversations with people within PSS that will offer you some short-term coaching and support. So finally, in terms of your well-being, it's about being kind to yourself and being kind to others, and I think that's been emphasised so much during this time of pandemic. So you look after your well-being and prioritise it. You're a valuable asset to your family, your loved ones, and to your patients and your colleagues as well. So we hope that you are able to have a healthy and happy career throughout. But if you don't look after your own well-being, it's going to be harder for you. So maintaining good psychological and physical health. Don't compare yourself to others. Analyse your own problems and be who you're going to be, because you are you. You can't be somebody else. So again, within a coaching and mentoring relationship, you're not trying to emulate your mentor master. You're trying to be yourself and to be the best you can be. Seek help early on. Don't let things build up. And again, mentoring and coaching support can help us to look at those sort of difficult areas for us and to build sort of structures that will help us through that. Understand your own limitations and resilience, and there's a number of resources out there that can help you to do that. Indulge in activities and hobbies that make you happy and keep your mind off work. So do stuff that's not medical, that engages you. Maintain a healthy support network of people that you trust, both within your teams, and obviously you've got your own personal families and friends as well, but it's important that you have those healthy structures out there. Look at the work-life balance that best suits you. So, you know yourself best, you know your own personal situation, but you need to fit in work and home life together to have that sort of long-term career that's going to be satisfying for you. Review your job plans regularly, and use appraisal and self-reflection effectively as well throughout your career. And you're going to hear a lot of other speakers today that are going to be talking about a number of those issues. So thanks very much for listening. I wish you all the best for your future careers. And thanks again for the team in the South East Division for inviting me to talk. I'll be seeing you hopefully in October, and I'll be there to answer any further questions you may have.
Thank you. The final talk in this module is on setting up local support systems for new consultants. StartWell is a process, not an event, and this talk is centered around our experience of setting up a local StartWell group in Berkshire. I will be doing this session along with my colleague, Dr. Marjan Gazirad, a consultant psychiatrist of intellectual disabilities with a diploma in occupational medicine and an interest in staff well-being. The idea behind this talk is that in order to embed the principles of StartWell and have effective ongoing support, there needs to be a sustainable system in place that is not limited to a national framework. Our session is titled Making Connections, Setting Up a Local StartWell Support Network. Hello again, I'm Sharada Deepak and I'll be doing the first part of this talk, setting up a local StartWell program, basically taking you along with us on this journey in setting up a local support system in Berkshire. The second half of this talk will be done by my colleague, Dr. Marjan Gazirad, a consultant psychiatrist colleague of mine in Berkshire. Before we go on to the actual process, I thought it'll be good for us to get reacquainted with the basic elements and principles of StartWell. And the reason being that this talk is essentially going to be focusing on how do we use these principles and use them effectively to get the most out of it and build a sustainable StartWell support system. And we will be mapping the themes of this talk onto the basic principles of making connections, maintaining continuous learning, ensuring our personal resilience, and making sure we are able to deliver effective clinical leadership within the teams, as well as using support effectively, whether it's local or national, and ensuring that our career is on the right track. The need for a local setup. Why do we need a local setup in the first place? In the 7 years of my consultant experience, these are some of these practical aspects I have realized that every organization is different, their culture, their values, and their working practices. And it's very difficult to just have a national framework that works for every employing trust. And as a trainee who then acted up as a consultant before taking on a substantive role, I have been blindsided by the implicit knowledge that I had that my colleagues who started new lacked. There are also different systems for CPD, appraisal, revalidation, and career opportunities for those of us who might be interested in taking on managerial positions, for example. Local intelligence around aspects like who would be the right person to approach if I wanted to become a trainer. If, say, you're working in a tertiary hospital, it might be a lot easier to get into opportunities around teaching and research. How would you do that if not, and so on. Meetings, that's the other bit. When I was a trainee, it was quite exciting and flattering to receive all these invites flooding in because it felt important to attend these. But it doesn't take long into a consultant post before realizing that the diaries get filled up really quickly. And having a safe space, I suppose, to work out what the purpose of these meetings are, which ones do we need to actually attend to get the most out of it, and which ones we need to be clear we don't have a role in, and who do you ask? And I think in training, we have a very good program that is explicit and clear in terms of expectations from our role, what you're expected to do to be good enough. Whereas as a consultant, that can be really hard and challenging to work out. And therefore, having local comparators as to, you know, how many clinics am I expected to do? What should a reasonable caseload be? What supports can I expect? And having a safe space to discuss that without feeling that, you know, am I being good enough or am I being too approachable, and finding that balance between being effective and burning out. Going back to the need for a local setup and the broad themes around it, my experience, as has been some of my colleagues, is how different employing trusts have different processes, different systems and services, and even different leadership systems to navigate. And strengthening local connections is invaluable, as I found out when I started working on the StartWell program. One of my colleagues was running it with me, was really helpful when I had a different service development project I needed support with. And we ended up doing joint training sessions, and doors opened in unexpected ways. In terms of career support, which is available, there is so much available locally that is not consistent nationally. So it's a lot more useful to have that set up within our employing trusts. And again, a big part of our role is effective clinical leadership. And most often it is our role as consultants to know the national frameworks and ensure that safe and effective patient care is delivered within the existing resources, which again are very different across different teams and services. And therefore, it's a lot easier and effective to have that system set up for us. And it's not just employing trust, it's services within employing trust. For instance, the CAMP services where I work in has a very different commissioning process, it appears, from other services. And having an easy access to relevant information is invaluable, isn't it? And it's hard to kind of come up with a national system that offers all of these like a directory. And most important of all, I suppose, it's StartWell isn't an event. It's not an event that we can attend and then go, wow, I like these principles and this is what I'm going to do. Because as the responsibilities pile up in one's consultant role, it gets harder and harder to maintain these good habits. Therefore, to sustain these StartWell principles and embed them and ensure there's ongoing support, I think a local system is badly needed. Coming now to our journey as to how we started setting up this process, I attended the College StartWell event in 2014. I found it very inspiring and very useful and had this tentative idea of could we set something, say, within the division or locally, a couple of trusts in the region perhaps. And I went about it by sending an email just to the new consultants I knew who joined with me, who I met at induction, asking whether they would be interested and could we have a meeting. And 4 of them replied. And we thought, let's go out and arrange a meeting. And because our diaries were busy by then, we couldn't find a time during the working day and we went out for a meal. And I still remember how struck we all were with the common themes that emerged. Causes for concern, our frustrations, and it felt quite validating and powerful knowing that we were not alone. And that's where the plan for a local StartWell group was born. And we decided to take it further, and what started off as a small open group slowly started growing. And there was a lot of planning involved, and we thought, let's work on the logistics and plan these meetings in a way that encouraged attendance. And so we tagged it along to the weekly academic program, although we had the meetings once a month. We decided on the format of breakfast meetings to offer an air of informality, join up with pastries, start at 8:15 in the morning and go up till 9. We welcomed new consultants. We also welcomed the other experienced consultants in the trust to come and support us and have a good, safe environment, really. And we also encouraged the advanced trainees to attend if they wish to participate and opened it up to SAS doctors. And the meetings basically progressed as we went along, and we didn't have a fixed agenda, but what we thought we would do is we would change the agenda dependent on the delegates or the attendees' needs. And further themes emerged from these meetings, and what we did is broadly mapped on these themes to the StartWell principles. And in no particular order, continuous learning was huge about CPD, peer groups. How do we join them? How do we make sure what's the process for applying study leave? How do we make sure we meet our requirements for appraisal and revalidation? And there were also particular topics like what does it feel like to go to the coroner's court for the first time? How do I deal with that? And then there were themes around clinical leadership, team working, dealing with difficult team dynamics, quality improvement projects. How do you make sure you have time to get involved in all of these? And out-of-hours support, on-calls were a huge source of concern and anxiety, and I could totally relate to that, because being on your own out of hours without knowing very well what the systems are around the Mental Health Act assessments and so on, as well as opportunities for supervising trainees and becoming an educator. Lots and lots of interest and opportunities in education, research and management as well. There were queries and thoughts around making connections within the trust, the CEA awards, roles within the division and faculty, and how does one apply for these? There were also talks and thinking around personal resilience, and again, this wasn't around, you know, doing training and toughening up kind of resilience. This was more about the experienced consultants talking about boundaries. How do we maintain them, and how do we set this right from the start, maintaining work-life balance and ensuring that we don't end up getting drawn into work and feeling overwhelmed, and having those connections both in our work and our personal lives to ensure that we are able to stay on and maintain a healthy career, and using support effectively. So what support systems were available in terms of well-being, occupational health, peer groups and parent groups. So looking at these themes, we then decided as a StartWell core group. When I say core group, it's a group of about 4 consultants. Some of them, you know, left and others joined. We thought we'd focus our efforts on some basic bits which we could do. And one of the main themes that emerged was timely, consistent information to new psychiatrists joining the trust. And we thought we'd do this by collating an induction pack and creating a bespoke induction program, and this is specifically for the new consultant psychiatrists joining the trust, and it is on top of the generic trust induction. We also thought we'd keep the open StartWell monthly meetings to offer academic and peer support for all the new consultants, as well as the ST6s, advanced trainees, and the SAS doctors. We did start off thinking about setting up a mentoring support group, and after a while it became apparent that we were duplicating our efforts, because even though mentoring was sought after and we thought it would be a good aspect to invest in, there were other agencies locally that were providing mentors and mentoring, and we thought our time would be best spent in signposting our colleagues to mentoring support. We also act as the link between new consultants and the trust resources. So when there are queries that medical staffing were not able to address, they would ask us to get involved, and we would do that. We also offer inclusive support and exposure for the advanced trainees if they just wanted to be a part of the StartWell meetings to get a feel of what consultant life is like. They were most welcome to attend. We were also open to the idea of offering them consultant interview support and applying for consultant posts if they felt that would be helpful. We also provide informal support or guidance in terms of if somebody just wanted to pick up the phone and give one of us a call or discuss particular aspects that they weren't sure about in a safe space, they were welcome to do so. And some of our reflections and learning from setting up this program and running it, and we have been running successfully for 5 years, and it seems a lot shorter though, and it seems to be a valued initiative delivering positive outcomes, and my colleague Dr. Gazirad will be talking more about that. And I particularly enjoyed the opportunity to work with like-minded colleagues, and one of our main reflections is to pick people to work with who you can work with, because it feels quite energizing. But some of the time we have had to make difficult decisions and have challenging conversations, and we were able to do that because we get along really well. And it feels a lot easier to do that because we have such a good working relationship. We also realized the commitment needed in terms of time and resources to keep this program running. And I wouldn't say it's unmanageable, but it's unpredictable, if that makes sense. So there might be times when we would get a lot of queries and questions and need for support from different services wanting us to get involved. At other times, it would be really quiet. And also, this isn't a program that is fixed or stagnant, if that makes sense. And we realized that the program needed to be shifted or changed depending on the needs. So one month there would be requests for academic talks, the other month there would be requests for mentoring support, and so on. So it does need constant reviewing, and that's what I think makes it exciting for those of us who are involved. sourcing and outsourcing, and that is a fine balance between realizing how much we would take on as a core StartWell group and how much of it could be around providing consultation, training, or signposting. And we have done well in recognizing limitations within ourselves, our colleagues, the local StartWell system, as well as the trust. So we have become a lot more realistic within the program in terms of what we can and can't do. And we have also learned that it's important to manage expectations, because when we started off, StartWell was this lovely fantasy initiative, and there was a sense from others and the medical staffing in particular, where they went, well, there is a StartWell initiative, so any queries, go to StartWell, they will sort it out for you. So we did have to work on ensuring that we weren't fostering dependence and being quite clear what our roles were, and that it was about, fostering independence and supporting until a certain time. And we did need, reminding ourselves and other people that StartWell is not a funded initiative. It's been set up by consultants who are using our time. And of course, we did manage to get that included in our SPA sessions as an initiative. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that frequently, so we don't take on more than we can manage. And the best bit really has been the personal satisfaction of watching juniors join in and flourish and take on roles and also step up and then pay it forward. So all in all, it has been very rewarding. So to summarize the basic program and the setup, the planning started in 2015. We formed the StartWell core group at the end of the year. We contacted the new consultants to gather interest. And then we approached the medical director with the StartWell plan, because we did want support from the trust and the medical body. It shouldn't be just 4 of us holding it on our shoulders. And the official program was launched with their blessings in 2016. And we collated the induction pack and started the trust induction as well. And my colleague will be talking about that in more detail. And we have ongoing close links with the medical staffing committee. The idea being that StartWell is like a transitional phase, a support system that helps new consultants join in. And as they grow in their roles and flourish, they forge close links with the medical staffing committee, and then they have a voice and the power to get their needs met and make changes. In terms of future directions, I mean, it is an evolving process, and that's what makes it more interesting, because we seem to be growing as individuals, as the initiative, and making changes as we see fits the delegates' needs. And we will continue to maintain an up-to-date information pack, and we have managed to get the digital transformation team to upload it onto our intranet, so it's accessible online. And we will be developing the induction session further based on feedback. And I would like to see, as my role as StartWell lead within the Southeast Division, to support the setting up of local StartWell processes in trusts within the region, the division, and beyond. And I hope that you will be interested in doing the same. And I would be really happy for anyone who's interested in setting up programs like this to get in touch with me, if that would be helpful. And I hope that you've enjoyed this part of the talk. I will be now passing on to my colleague, Dr. Marjan Gazirad, to do the next part of the talk, focusing on the induction pack as well as the StartWell new consultants induction in Berkshire.
Thank you, Sharada, for your very informative talk. I'm sure by now most people have got some ideas about how to set up a local StartWell group within their organization if they were planning to do so. So following to Dr. Deepak's talk about our journey as a StartWell core group, I'm just going to talk to you about how we used our experience within our StartWell journey and put them into practice. I'm sure you are aware of Kolb's experiential learning cycle, and what it says is just say that we do an experiment we reflect and review our experiment. Then we make changes, redo the experiment again, and then we reflect and review it again. So this is what we did through our journey of like StartWell program. So we, after a discussion that we had within our group, we thought it might be helpful to have an induction pack for the consultants who are going to join the trust, to be aware of what's been happening or what are the key people, where to go to if they need to for any queries or questions. So we had an outdated version of induction pack. We used that as a performer for us to set up an induction pack. We had like regular meetings about the content of the pack, and then we put together comprehensive like information about medical leadership within the trust, medical education, talking about appraisals, talking about occupational health, and talking about library, pharmacy, or whatever the people need to know if in their clinical work. And then we thought, is that enough if we have just a hard copy and just give it to the HR to provide it to the new consultant? Would that be enough for the new consultant? Then we thought it might be helpful to make it as an electronic version. So we had discussions with the digital management team, and we created an electronic copy of it and then uploaded into intranet. And then we, when we were like giving the pack to the consultant on their like when they start within the trust, we will also let them know that there is an electronic copy which is on internet. And then we normally review the pack and regularly update it on a yearly basis, because some people may change within the trust, so we make sure that all the information is up to date. So that was the first bit that we talked about, and then we put an action on it. And then we thought, again, is the induction pack enough for the consultant? And then we thought it would be helpful to have an induction program as well. We decided to go for a half-a-day induction program. Two already we delivered, one in September 2019 and one in 2020. First, we thought it might be helpful to have it on a 6-monthly basis, but then we felt that would that be enough, like consultant joining the trust within the 6 months? So we decided to go to annual basis and running it with the new consultant joining us within a year of their start. So if you look at the program, we use the StartWell Royal College of Psychiatrists like principles to make up our program. And in our program, we have medical director coming and talk about medical leadership and what is the executive board or management look like. We have session for medical director of medical education or college tutors to come and talk about educational opportunities and medical education within the trust. We also have sessions on appraisal, revalidation, job planning, and also we have some a session on well-being, as well as like connecting with the colleagues within this session. So we ran 2 of these like sessions so far, and then we felt that we need to have some feedbacks to improve our program. So we had feedback from September 2019 and September 2020. And as you can see, the response rate was very good. So we had a lot of positive feedback about our program, which I'm going to into details for you and talk about what we received. On the feedback, we asked the consultant to tell us about have they found it relevant, what was the content looked like for them, was it what they were expecting, and were there like a engaging program or not? And as you can see on the feedback that we received in the 2019, they all found overall the program very good. They all found the program relevant to their role, and they were all satisfied with what they received. They, like, all of them felt that it met their expectation, and then it was very engaging for them. So that was more like quantitative like measure of our the feedback. We also had some qualitative feedback according to the session, and what was like very informative for us, that everybody was very happy with the friendly environment and like a very supportive place to talk to each other and see the new consultant who joined the trust, and knowing the medical director, knowing the director of medical education, and knowing the core group, like StartWell core group as well. They also commented on the content of the session as well, and felt that it was relevant to them, and there were like a good range of topics, and they commented of being well organized, like induction program. There was also some suggestion of how we can improve the sessions, and one of the things they highlighted, some of them didn't receive the information pack at the beginning of their job, so that was something that we thought it might be helpful we look into it. They also talked about having a buddy or like mentor, and also they talked about like having a catching up session, and like having, like, once they are in the as a consultant within the trust, after like a 1 or 2 year, it would be helpful to have a catching up session to see was there anything that they would like to add to the program for the new consultants. So we used the feedback that we received using the Kolb's model, and then we made some changes. So first of all, we made sure that we have like ongoing communication with the human resources, making sure that they're sending the induction pack to them. We also thought about thinking about like catching up session as well. So for the second meeting that we had in September 2020, as you can see, again, the overall satisfaction was like very good. So 4.8 out of 5 were very happy or satisfied with the program. Again, they found the content very relevant to their post, and then it met their expectation. Some of the things, again, they highlighted in our program was the appraisal information that was just being provided. Also, they commented on the well-being session that they had. One of the consultant, she was like experienced consultant from another trust, and she said that this was the first time that I heard a session on well-being, and she felt that it was very important for the new consultant to know about it. And they again mentioned about like friendly and very supportive environment for the new consultant as a more like a peer support session for them as well. And they suggested some like discussion about like on-call responsibility, which we know that it is like anxiety provoking for the consultant when they join a new trust to know what's where to go, what are the on-call responsibilities, and how they can outsource information. And they also like commented on COVID, although this is very specific to COVID like situation that we are in, but that was something that they made a comment on the program. So having the induction pack and having the induction program and having feedbacks from the consultant who had all these, we, as a core group, we thought, what is the way forward specifically in related to these programs? So we thought about consultant buddy, and we thought about mentoring scheme, but as Sharada already mentioned, because there is a good regional mentoring scheme within within the region, we thought it might be a duplication. So instead of we running a new mentoring scheme, we just signpost a new consultant to the regional mentoring scheme. We also thought about doing a recording of the induction, and then given that all the consultants who attended the meeting find the friendly environment very helpful, we thought it would be helpful to have a recording of the sessions, but we don't lose the in-person or face-to-face meetings as well. So alongside of the face-to-face meetings, we will have the recording. We also thought about extending StartWell meeting for new consultants as a catch-up sessions again, to see if that's going to be helpful. And this is something that it is on pipeline. So we are hoping after our third induction program, which is going to happen in September 2021, we will have a catch-up session with all the consultants within all these 3 years cohort to just see how they improved in their job roles, and is there anything that we could do to support them further. And we also thought about putting an information about on-calls within, or seclusion, rapid tranquilization, or anything else that might be relevant to the on-call duties into the induction program. I'm sure doing all these needs a lot of support from the management, from education department, and colleagues as well. So that we just put this slide to say that we were not able to do this project without the support from our medical director, director of medical education, and the colleagues who were with us, still with us, or the people who left the trust, and we were being able to do this program all together. So thank you for listening. I'm sure you may have some questions about how to set up the program. If you have any questions, you could email the organizers, and then we can respond to your questions on the meeting that we will have in October.
Thank you, Dr. Gazirad. And that brings us to the end of Module 3 and the webinar part of the StartWell 2021 event. I really hope that you enjoyed it and found it helpful and useful. This is a final request from me to please send in your questions and comments to the organizer to be passed on to the speakers so they can be addressed during the live session, which is on the Wednesday, the 13th of October between 12 noon and 2 p.m. I look forward to seeing you all at the live event, and thank you for watching.